From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Chung, and this matters. Listen, this isn't going to be the sexiest conversation, but let's not hold it in any longer. I need to go, you need to go. At some point, we all need to use the bathroom. Most of this one-dose summer will be spent outside just like last year. The public parks and streets are the city's backyard, our lifeline through this pandemic, the safest way to see our family and friends. So you've probably found yourself in this exact situation. You've been outside for a few hours, maybe you've had a drink, and then, as it does for everyone, nature calls. The trouble is, public bathrooms aren't always open in Toronto. They're often locked, even during summer, or they're in bad shape. Porta-potties aren't in every major downtown park. It's not a huge surprise to see people duck behind a tree or hide in a bush to take care of business. But where's the dignity in that? Joining us on the podcast is Shawn Micallef, contributing columnist to the Toronto Star. He writes about urbanism, Toronto, and the GTA. To Shawn, this isn't really toilet humor. It's about public space in a city and who gets to enjoy it. Shawn, always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Hey, Adrian.
We can count a million little things, some big things too, that the pandemic took away that we used to take for granted. And maybe this is a weird question to start things off on, but our bathrooms, public bathrooms, was that something we didn't know that we needed until it was taken away?
I think it was always a problem. There weren't enough in Toronto or many cities' public spaces. But what we could do is rely on cafes and businesses to go to the washroom when you're out and about in the city, like ducking into a Starbucks, which is generally reliable, or a Tim Hortons. Or, I think everyone probably who was, a pedestrian, or if you're a delivery driver, or kind of anybody who works in the city, a trade, you could sort of have this mental map of where all the good washrooms are. Like department stores are my favorite because, the higher floor you go to, they're usually the cleaner, the cleaner they are. And with all those gone, I think it really showed the absence of a proper network of public washrooms that allow people just to live in the city.
Yeah, what have you noticed about the availability of bathrooms in the city, especially during the pandemic? I'm particularly thinking about public bathrooms in parks or porta-potties, places where now that everything else is closed, you have to go to. What have you noticed about that?
Yeah, there was a big push at various times in the pandemic to open up the washrooms that might have been closed for the winter because some of them aren't winterized, and to put out porta-johns. I know if you go to Hyde Park right now, there's a lot of porta-johns. It's actually a good thing. But it found that the city's list of what's open and what's not open was sometimes inconsistent. I was at Bluffers Park in Scarborough, which was supposed to have a winterized washroom, and it was during the day. It was 2 p.m. Go out for a walk, and there were hundreds of people out for a walk. I think it was New Year's Day or the day after. A beautiful day, and the washrooms were locked tight. So there's an inconsistency. It's obviously it wasn't a priority, and it still isn't a priority, as well as the state of the washrooms, right? A weekend or two ago, a nice sunny Sunday, the washrooms in the Grange Park were open. Nice modern washrooms that they built 4 or 5 years ago when the park was renovated. But they were in such a terrible state because they were just so well used that day, and they didn't get the proper maintenance.
Yeah. I checked the City of Toronto website this morning, and again, like you said, they do list that there are bathrooms and some porta-potties open, 274 at their latest count. It says they're open 9 a.m. to dusk, but again, there are many reports of people saying, well, what does dusk mean? Sometimes they close at 6 p.m., sometimes they close at 7. And so there's a lack of consistency there, as you were saying.
Yeah, and I know there's City of Toronto washrooms at the Brickworks, which close at 5. So you can't really plan your day and rely on these things. But the dusk thing is also interesting because dusk means different things to different people. And the crews that go around, they might have to close, I don't know what it is, 10 or more washrooms. So some are later than dusk, some are earlier. But also, why dusk? I know I've been told there's safety issues, but maybe we need bigger crews, have a 3-person crew. Why shouldn't Torontonians be allowed on warm summer nights to look at the moon and the stars?
You wrote a big Twitter thread about this that got a lot of reaction. You really didn't hold back. You called the city's approach to this patronizing and paternalistic. Why do you think pointing out bathroom space has touched a nerve with so many people in the city?
I think it's one of those issues that really affect everyone. Everyone has to go. And so if you spent any time outdoors in the pandemic, you've come across this need. And I keep hearing from people who probably aren't political in any other way. It's like, this is a thing, right? And so many people have said that they now have a perimeter around their house of how far they can go. Some people have like a 10-minute walk that they can do because they have little kids who need to go, or some people have a medical issue that forces them to go to the washroom more. There's all kinds of reasons why this affects different people more profoundly than others, but it does affect everyone. And another issue is just the general accessibility of washrooms. I think we're seeing what a lot of disabled folks have experienced, because even the washrooms we have, not all of them are accessible. So we're seeing that limitation that some people felt across the wider population.
So do you see this as a health issue? Is it an equity and accessibility issue? Is it all of those things?
Yeah, it's absolutely all of those things. And just the right to public space. We're becoming a really crowded city of people that live in apartments, people that do not have backyards. Historically, Toronto was a city of yards and still largely governed by people who have their own backyards, who maybe don't see this as a priority. So the parks, and this is not just about, hipsters in Trinity Bellwoods, on a Sunday bike ride last weekend, all the way out to the edge of Toronto, up to Steeles. Every park was filled with families having picnics and, doing the right thing, being outside during the pandemic. And it's a big deal. It's our space. It's our, collective backyard. We should be able to go to the washroom with dignity.
Yeah, you make such a good point about how this affects everyone. Literally everybody I know has made decisions about what parks to hang out at or what your bike route looks like or how far they want to walk, depending on, okay, we know that there's a bathroom there, so that's a pit stop that we can make. But people have to make these decisions, and it's a very real thing in people's lives.
Yeah, our bodies have these physical limitations. Sitting here in my little office, I look out over an alleyway off one of the main streets in Toronto. And throughout the pandemic, I've seen parents with like toddler-aged kids, whatever, come back in the kind of little scrappy, grassy parking area and, pull their kids' pants down to go to the bathroom. And I tend to leave or shut my curtains to give them some privacy. But Toronto is supposed to be this, world-class city, whatever all these, boosterish terms.
We love saying world-class, yeah.
Right? But you're forcing people to take their kids into an alley to go to the bathroom just because they're out for a walk. That's disgraceful.
We'll be right back. I wonder what the lack of bathrooms, public bathrooms in Toronto during a pandemic, what does it say to you about this city? Especially when we extend that to the way we think about public space in this city.
It says we're just cheap. We're a historically cheap town about certain things. And this just isn't a priority, and I don't want to kind of harp on the people with backyards, but most of them have them, and I hope they're listening to their constituents, the people who live in the city, that this is necessary. But we're spending $2 billion or whatever it is to rebuild a small section of the Gardner. The police budget is over $1 billion, $3 or $4 million just to have police horses trotting around. And yet we have to fight to keep a bathroom open till dusk, even the ones we have. I think we're hopefully seeing there's an appetite to change the historic kind of overlooking the value of parks and public washrooms, but just the value of public space in the city as being as integral to the life and public health as the public health department itself.
Yeah. I think about the last podcast that you and I did. We talked about making the most of the city, even in a dreary, long winter. And then now we're in the summer now. We're at the beginning of summer. And there have been two big examples when it comes to public space that I think has really divided this city. Or maybe it's three. We're talking about public bathrooms here, but I'm also thinking about the proposed idea to allow public drinking in parks. That was shot down by City Council.
Councillor Josh Matlow brought forward a motion asking to implement a pilot project to allow people to consume alcohol at a park or a beach. The committee voted to refer the motion to parks and licensing staff, essentially killing the proposal.
And then the city has also banned tiny shelter homes for encampment residents. Is there an inherent Toronto-ness in how we deal with these issues in this city?
It's pretty paternalistic, definitely. I was just looking at pictures of, a trip to Spain 2 years ago right now, and people pouring out of bars and, with their glasses of Grand Reserva wines and whatever else. And it all works. If you've traveled to other places, this isn't such a big deal, but we've been trained to, think it's a bad thing, the public drinking. And, all the concerns which are legitimate about like, what if, what people might do if they're drinking, all those things are already illegal anyway, like, harassment and all that sort of thing. So that paternalism maybe hopefully will go. The tiny shelter thing is also, it was interesting. And one thing I thought about last week is the fire chief, Chief Pegg, was often, in those news conferences when they were talking about the tiny shelters, that they were unsafe. They were, a fire hazard. And there were some fires and there have been some deaths. And so that was a reason why the city had to get rid of them. So instead of working with the fellow that was making the tiny shelters or others the encampment network, in making these things safer, they use safety issues as just the way to shut it down. And so if that's a safety issue, how come the fire chief doesn't come out, in every news conference and talk about road safety, right? Because far more people are injured and killed in Toronto by motor vehicles. But the chief doesn't talk about that, but he talks about tiny shelters. So there's something, that's a political choice.
Yeah, city councillors have even sort of addressed that perhaps culture in Toronto, that they were trying to fight against that. They said, Toronto is not a city of no, but it feels like a lot of people who live in Toronto actually do feel that way.
Yeah, with the public drinking thing, there were, I think, some that said, we are not a city of no, while they were actually saying no, right? Like, there's just such a weird disconnect about this thing, But Toronto's not the only one, like most of Anglo-Canada is pretty weird about the public drinking. Calgary just announced a pilot project, 30 picnic tables in one park, I think it is. That's not going to do it. And as many people have pointed out, drinking beers in a park, it was happening before the pandemic, but it has really, not taken off, but it just, it's happening. And the sky has not fallen. But by keeping it illegal, it gives police the right to harass people in public space. So if it's happening, just get rid of that risk that people are under.
Okay, so I'm sure there's someone listening by now who's thought of a time they really had to go. They couldn't find a bathroom at the park, or they found it and then it was locked. They are outraged. What can they actually do about it? How can they put pressure on the city to expand the maintenance or to make changes to something that clearly all of us are going to be using well into the fall?
Yeah, it's short of, taking an axe and opening the doors to their washrooms themselves, which I guess I don't actually advocate people do for legal reasons. Call and write your counselor and do it again and again and again, and do it publicly and get your neighbors to do it and your family members who feel this. They will actually listen to that. You have to force them to make this a priority. I remember early on in the pandemic, that I won't name which one, but, when people were complaining, myself included, on Twitter about this, some counselors came out and just immediately came out with the excuses why it can't be done. We don't have this, it's not winterized, instead of saying, okay, let's find a solution, right? So if your counselor's not telling you excuses versus what solutions can we find, tell them that's not acceptable because, these are political choices. It does not have to be like this.
Especially when these seemingly more minor decisions that are being made, it does make a big impact on the way we live in this city and the way we enjoy this city, so that, kids don't have to go in an alleyway next to, where you live or where anybody lives, that this is an equity thing.
Yeah, and I think in that sense, that's what the pandemic has done. It's kind of shown a lot of people that it is this everyday issue, right, that affects just the livability and how enjoyable or unenjoyable a day in the city can be, or in just an hour-long walk. So, even as the pandemic wanes, hopefully, Toronto has reached the critical mass of population, and its public realm doesn't reflect it yet in the, amount of space we have, amount of washrooms we have. So keep pushing, keep calling your counselor.
Shawn, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Adrian.
And that's Shawn Micallef, contributing columnist to the Toronto Star. You can find Shawn's many great photos of this city in all the different seasons and his thoughts on Toronto on his Twitter feed, @Shawn Micallef. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Chung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Mudhar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.